Great. Thank you, Robert, and good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. I am very excited to be here. I'm Liana. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for Northern California Grantmakers, which is part of Philanthropy California, one of the co-sponsors of this webinar. So again, we'd like to thank you for being here. I'm really excited to introduce our great lineup of speakers this morning. We have Orson Aguilar joining us from Latino Prosperity. We have Catherine Bracy, who's joining us from Tech Equity. We have Pete Manzo from United Ways of California. And we have Don Howard, who's from the James Irvine Foundation. So Orson's going to get us started. And for those of you who don't know him, he is a nationally recognized leader in economic justice and wealth building for communities of color. And in particular, he's the founding president and president and CEO of Latino Prosperity, which is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to closing the Latino wealth gap through national, state, and local advocacy. Orson has played a key role in some of the advocacy we'll be hearing about in the next hour, and he's going to get us started with a quick overview and kind of frame up the issue. So thank you so much, Orson. I'm handing it over to you now.
Liana, thank you for the introduction. And first, I want to apologize. I am a little under the weather, so if I have to pause every now and then, please bear with me. Good afternoon. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., where I'm here for some business. But really excited to be with you all today to tell an important story. And so I want to thank the host of this webinar for having us today. The Eyes on OpenAI campaign, which you're going to hear about, began because one of the most consequential AI companies, not just in the country, but in the world, OpenAI, happens to be and was created as a nonprofit organization with a charitable mission to serve humanity. When OpenAI moved toward a full for-profit conversion, for us, it triggered some serious questions about how its charitable assets would be created. At stake were public assets, perhaps over $100 billion in public assets, created under the nonprofit structure, assets that belong to the public, not investors. Our core concerns, the key question was, if OpenAI wanted to remove or diminish its nonprofit, how much should it be required to leave behind for true charitable purpose? Now, this wasn't theoretical. As we all know, California has a long history of overseeing nonprofit to for-profit conversions. We knew that the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta, would play a key role here, just as the state did in landmark healthcare conversions that created some amazing foundations, such as the California Endowment, California Wellness Foundation, and the California Healthcare Foundation. In those cases, billions in charitable assets were protected and redirected to benefit the public. And we believed simply that those same principles should apply to OpenAI's move to diminish the nonprofit structure. We wanted three basic things. We wanted a fair and independent valuation of those assets that we, looking at other experts, thought to be worth up to $100 billion or more. We wanted independent governance of those assets, and we wanted mostly a transparent process consistent with California's past oversight of such conversions. Now, these protections aren't guaranteed. They were not guaranteed when OpenAI proposed their restructure, and we knew we would have to organize and fight for that. And that's what we did. We organized more than 60 organizations, philanthropic leaders, civil rights organizations, racial justice and community organizations, tech policy experts, watchdog groups came together pretty swiftly and strategically. And I think this is also a story of how unlikely allies can quickly unite in a collaborative model to fight for justice, transparency, and accountability. Our campaign used a multi-front approach, right? Not only did we organize some of the best leaders in California, we issued 5 major letters and petitions urging our Attorney General to ensure an independent valuation and governance, including a very detailed 30-page administrative petition calling for a halt to the for-profit conversion until we could ensure that the public assets were protected. We directly engaged with the Attorney General, but also with executives at OpenAI. We issued timely statements after major developments. And for those of you who track OpenAI, there seems to be a timely development every day, just given how dynamic and how interested the nation is in AI and OpenAI. We had a high impact media briefing, attracting reporters from the LA Times, Political, AP, Chronicle, Philanthropy. I've never, of all the campaigns I've worked on in my life, I was telling my board, I've never had one where, reporters are hungry to hear the latest scoop. And just this weekend, on Saturday, I was talking to a reporter, and right after this call, I'll be talking to a reporter about this. So there's immense media interest on this issue. Altogether, we generated 50 plus major media stories. And that's not the most important thing, but the most important thing is that we shifted the narrative. This was an opaque conversation about restructuring that became an issue of public trust and nonprofit governance, and most importantly, about how Californians came together to protect their charitable assets. Our coordinated pressure forced public scrutiny on a process that was initially hidden from view. And we achieved a lot. First, OpenAI reversed course on its for-profit conversion, abandoning the plan altogether. Looks like they knew that there would be a high price to pay, over $100 billion, that they would have to leave behind, and they decided not to do that. They next, they dangled a leaf, you could call it, a $50 million fund for charitable organizations in California. After continued pressure, they announced, without details, that they would propose $100 billion nonprofit that, again, like very, very little details, but at least now they're recognizing that the nonprofit is worth at least $100 billion. And finally, last month, they closed their restructuring with the AG's approval and with an MOU that adopts a $130 billion valuation, making this one of the largest nonprofits, not just in the US, but in the world. And so those are, major developments that we don't think would have happened without the pressure, not just from us, but other organized campaigns throughout the country. We refuse to accept symbolic or superficial charitable structure. But the one thing that we did not get, the one thing we pushed hardest for, was an independent charitable entity, fully separate from OpenAI, that could truly operate in the public interest. And that remains the central unresolved issue and really the most important question for long-term public accountability. So key issues that remain. First, is the OpenAI Foundation truly independent, or is it structurally tied to OpenAI's commercial interests? There are a lot of conflicts of interest. You have overlapping board members. So on the public benefit side, you have board members whose sole job is to maximize investor return. Some of those same board members are on the nonprofit board, who are there to protect the mission of OpenAI, to ensure that AI truly serves humanity. Another major question we have is, will the nonprofit's assets be fair and have an independent valuation? For example, if OpenAI goes public, will the nonprofit get adequate compensation for the valuation if the company does go public? And probably the most central question is, will these charitable funds support independent public interest work? Or will it simply reinforce OpenAI's business strategy? So simple, is this true mission-driven work? Or is it simply, as some have said, free ChatGPT accounts for the general public? Lastly, I'd just say OpenAI is not just a story about technology, it's about economic justice, it's about democracy, it's about public trust, it's about Californians organizing and banding together on an important issue that impacts us most. And when AI companies control enormous philanthropic assets without oversight, we know who the consequences fall hardest on those least represented in the tech sector, working communities, communities of color. Our campaign, the Eyes on AI campaign, showed that the public interest in community organizations must have a voice in how AI evolves and how charitable assets are safeguarded. Again, this was not just about OpenAI. It was about creating a public interest model on how we hold AI companies and nonprofits accountable. And lastly, it showed what's possible when diverse coalitions, including unlikely allies, act together with clarity, urgency, and shared purpose. Now, as we look ahead, many people are asking what's next, and we're actively planning our next steps. We want to hear from the public, we want to hear from you, from our partners. There's still a lot of important work to be done to ensure true independence, real accountability, and a governance model worthy of public trust. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Liana.
Thank you. Thank you, Arsen. And thanks for your leadership and the work of the coalition and that thorough recap. And so now I'm going to bring Catherine Bracy into the conversation. Catherine is a civic technologist and community organizer whose work focuses on the intersection of technology and political and economic inequality. She's the founder and CEO of Tech Equity, a nonprofit organization that raises public consciousness about economic equity issues resulting from the tech industry's products and practices, and advocates for change that ensures tech's evolution benefits everyone. So, Catherine, you're going to tell us a little bit more about the AI governance structure and what all this means. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a little bit of context for those of you who, unlike me, have not been steeped in every turn in OpenAI's evolution over the last several years. So I wanted to just give everybody a little bit of background on how OpenAI was founded and how it evolved, and basically the milestones along the way that got us to where we are, and then talk a little bit about the implications for that. So first, many may not know that OpenAI, when it was founded as a nonprofit in late 2015, was founded as a nonprofit explicitly because its founders, including Elon Musk and Sam Altman, believed that the technology that they were developing was too dangerous to be left in the hands of private industry. That the typical approach to building technology and sort of fostering tech startups, raising venture capital was particularly dangerous when mixed with what they believed would be a world-changing, potentially for bad, new technology. So the decision to found OpenAI as a nonprofit research lab was really sort of a radical thing at the time. Over the course of the next sort of 3 or 4 years, as they started building generative AI and approaching the point where they needed to start thinking about putting things out into the public, they realized that they were not going to be able to continue their work if they were solely funded with charitable contributions, that they would need to create some vehicle to raise private capital. And so in 2019, they made a decision, I think probably the most fateful decision in this whole conversation, to spin up a new entity, OpenAI LP, which would be a for-profit company owned by the nonprofit, but that would be able to raise private capital from venture capital investors and others. As they did this, they sort of created this bespoke governance structure to continue, at least on paper, to try to protect the mission of the nonprofit from the influence of investors. And they did this, but most prominently through creating a capped profit model, where investors would be limited in how much upside they could receive, which in theory would prevent them from exerting the maximalist pressure on the company to chase profits as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, that did not work. And as they quickly became essentially a tech product company rather than a research lab, they began to feel the tensions of that structure. And that all came to a head in November of 2023. Many of you may have been aware of this at the time when it happened. But the nonprofit board of OpenAI, made a decision to fire the CEO, Sam Altman, just a year after releasing ChatGPT. And this triggered a major backlash from shareholders, including employees, but also investors and companies like Microsoft, which is still the biggest shareholder in the for-profit company. And this ultimately, long story short, resulted in Altman being rehired and the nonprofit board being pretty much entirely dissolved and replaced with people who were much friendlier to Sam Altman's view of how the company should operate. Then in a year later, so from reporting over this period of time, what we think was going on behind the scenes here is that investors were making very clear to OpenAI and to Sam Altman that there would be no more money coming to the company if they could not figure out how to get it out from under the control of the nonprofit to ensure that what happened in November could not happen again and put their investments at risk. And so this is when OpenAI started putting the plan in motion to decouple the nonprofit from the for-profit. And it also sort of caused many of us who work in the space, including Orson and others like Public Citizen, to sort of raise eyebrows about what was happening here and this decision to basically undercut the nonprofit. And it seemed like it was going to be happening without any scrutiny from regulators. So as part of this is when the Eyes on OpenAI coalition came together. There were also other coalitions of sort of AI safety groups, including many former OpenAI employees who were extremely alarmed by the direction that the company was taking. And this ultimately led a few months later to OpenAI deciding that they were going to backtrack from that decision to decouple the nonprofit from the for-profit and instead maintain this ownership structure where the nonprofit owned the for-profit. Now, as Orson alluded to, that did not answer many of our questions. And in fact, it actually raised additional questions. And I think still there are many questions separate from the governance structure related to nonprofit law and whether OpenAI is actually staying on the right side of nonprofit law, including, all of us who run nonprofits understand the ins and outs of conflict of interest policy and private inurement. And that seems to be something that regulators should be looking into as well. And so we continued to push these questions to ensure that there was going to be independence and that there were checks and balances in place to ensure that OpenAI, if it were to maintain this structure, would be on the right side of the law. In spirit and in practice. And that includes, as part of that, what they proposed to do was convert the for-profit company from what was at the time, this capped profit model into a traditional startup. It would be incorporated as a public benefit corporation in Delaware, but it would remove the profit caps and essentially allow it to raise investor capital as any normal tech startup would, and eventually go public, which now we have reached the point where the investors have well and truly fully taken over the direction of the company. And, as someone who was paying attention back in 2015, when it was established as a nonprofit explicitly to avoid interference from investors, this was a pretty sobering and tragic day for me. And then, of course, Orson mentioned that several months after that, just last month, a few weeks ago, OpenAI announced that they had reached a settlement with the attorneys general of Delaware and California to maintain the ownership of the nonprofit in the for-profit. I'm sure we'll get into this in the panel discussion, but we still have a variety of questions about how this will actually work in practice. I mean, I think anybody looking at the company from the outside has to question whether it is possible, given what happened in November 2023 when Sam was fired, for the nonprofit board to maintain true independent oversight of the company. So that remains a very relevant question for us. Just to give you a sense of the sort of Byzantine nature of the structure, I've got the org structure here. I'll be honest, I don't actually truly understand most of what's going on here, other than to say that when the die was cast and OpenAI decided that they were going to take outside investment, the ownership structure to try to protect the for-profit from the vagaries of investors was really, like, you can see that this was never going to really hold up over the course of time. All of the various trying to have their cake and eat it too, with maintaining the nonprofit mission, but also inviting shareholders to own a piece of the for-profit is always going to be a fundamental tension that I believe cannot be resolved. In other cases where nonprofits own for-profit companies, the nonprofit is the sole shareholder in the for-profit entity, which removes a lot of these conflicts of interest. So I just wanted to put this up here so you can get a sense of how complicated this actually is. And then to leave you before we go into the panel discussion, just to put a finer point on what this actually means for people on the ground. The reason that this is so important to me and to the Eyes on OpenAI coalition is that the way that OpenAI develops this technology has critical importance for humans. And I think the idea that they were right. I mean, the tragedy of all of this is that Elon Musk and Sam Altman were right, that this technology was too dangerous to be left to the hands of the private markets. And we are seeing how that is playing out right now in the way that OpenAI's products are affecting our kids' health, our labor markets, our social cohesion in general. And I think it begs the question for all of those who run nonprofits: what are nonprofits for? And I would posit that any organization that is doing this much harm in the community, regardless of how much money they are spending on, their sort of nominal nonprofit mission, the harms that they are doing are more than we should be accepting as a nonprofit community. And I think this is the point to really hold on to. This can seem like an esoteric conversation about governance structures and nonprofit law, which, makes our eyes roll back. But it's really important for us to keep at the center of this why it matters that this nonprofit mission still maintains some control over the company, and that ultimately, hopefully, one day, some of these assets can be independently managed and funneled into causes that will help prevent some of the harms that OpenAI is creating. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Liana, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for helping pull back the curtain on OpenAI's governance and breaking that down in such an accessible way. So we know that the philanthropic community and allies have been part of this conversation and important allies in the coalition. And so we want to bring in the voice of Don Howard, who is the president and CEO of the James Irvine Foundation. And Don's going to tell us a little bit more about the foundation in his remarks. So go ahead, Don.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank Cal Nonprofits for inviting me to be here. As Liana said, I'm Don Howard. I have the privilege of leading the James Irvine Foundation. And for folks who don't know us, we're a privately endowed foundation. We're independent of any company or family, and we focus entirely on California. Our singular goal is a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. This year, we'll provide $158 million in grants toward that goal, including to organizations that are amplifying worker voice and agency in the development and deployment of AI. So I'm here today to talk about what's at stake from OpenAI's recent restructuring, a development that has significant implications, not just for the tech sector, but for all of us who care about the future of work, economic equity, and the integrity of our nonprofit sector. So a little history. When other large nonprofits in California have converted to for-profit status, the state has required them to transfer substantial assets to independent charitable entities. For instance, Blue Cross of California was compelled to give more than $3 billion in stock to establish the California Endowment and the California Healthcare Foundation when it converted in the 1990s. HealthNet established the California Wellness Foundation with $300 million in cash and significant stock holdings. These foundations continue to serve the public good today. Now here, the conversion of OpenAI put approximately $130 billion of charitable assets into the OpenAI Foundation. Yet the OpenAI Foundation's board is comprised essentially of the same board members as the for-profit arm. That's a recipe for conflicts of interest in how those resources are deployed. Our understanding is that the OpenAI Foundation is not even required to meet the 5% payout rule for private foundations. So the questions many of us have been asking are, will those charitable assets be used to advance the public good? And who'll get to decide how those assets will be deployed? So I believe that at least two of the priorities for that $130 billion should be to support workers affected by AI and to strengthen our safety net, which will be under even greater strain as workers get displaced from their jobs. Artificial intelligence will impact all our lives, our economy, and the future of work in ways we still don't fully understand and certainly aren't prepared for. It's already reshaping California's workforce. Workers across industries are training the very AI systems that could eventually deskill, displace, or surveil, often without any say in how these tools are developed or deployed. According to a recent survey from Catherine's organization, Tech Equity, 59% of Californians are concerned that the benefits of AI will accrue only to the wealthiest households and corporations, not to working people in the middle class. Right now, the AI revolution is happening to workers, not with them. And as almost always happens with rapid change, low-wage workers are the most vulnerable. They're the ones who stand to be harmed the most by job displacement. They're the ones with the least control over workplace decisions. They're the ones least likely to have a seat at the table when companies determine how to implement these new technologies. And they're also ones who will need to retrain for new jobs. And those who can't find the new jobs will end up in lower paying jobs and or in the safety net. All parties, particularly workers, stand to gain when that $130 billion is truly serving the public good. So for our part at Irvine and our other funders, we need to prioritize supporting advocates like Tech Equity for AI governance frameworks that protect vulnerable populations. We need to support worker organizing so that workers have a say in how AI is implemented in their jobs. We need to support smart reforms to our safety net, which is already insufficient and will only be under greater strain as workers are displaced. We need to support innovations in the workforce development system to scale up and successfully provide retraining services. We need to support experiments using AI to empower workers and small businesses to advance their economic opportunities. And we need to support efforts to hold the OpenAI Foundation accountable for truly serving the public good. So I'm looking forward to exploring some of these questions with the leaders here today. So let's dive in. I'm going to go ahead and ask Pete Monzo to join the conversation and bring back Orson. Pete, are you there?
I'm here. I just can't turn on my video for some reason.
While Pete is
Okay.
getting situated, I was going to do just a very quick intro so that folks know who he is.
Thank
He
you.
is an advocate for human development and also the CEO of United Ways of California, which is an association of California's 28 local United Ways across the state, whose mission is to mobilize the caring power of communities to improve health, education, and financial results for low-income children and families. Together, the United Ways of California work to advance opportunities for low-income Californians by implementing community impact programs and advocating for policies that help them move up. So welcome, Pete. Thank you for joining us, and you are on mute still.
I'm going to go to Orson first, so you got a second there.
Okay.
So Orson, you described your role, and thank you for your leadership in putting the Eyes on OpenAI coalition together. You already spoke to some of the goals of the coalition and to some of what you saw as the wins of the work and some of the things that still need to be done. What's your sense of where the coalition goes next? What are a few options that you think are out there for us to consider? And it also would be pretty good because you described this. You said unlikely bedfellows that ended up in the coalition. Describe some of the different groups that were there and sort of the types of bedfellows that showed up.
Yeah, so you asked two important questions. I'll go with the first in terms of what's next. And the truth is, we don't know. We're going to have so the Eyes on OpenAI has a kind of a leadership committee that is going to come together in December. We're first going to meet with the Attorney General Bonta and his team to understand the MOU, what's in it, what's not in it. And then we're gonna gather, but we're also gonna hear from the public, right? I think that's why this webinar is important so that people can let us know what they think. But I think one of the things that I heard from your remarks and Catherine remarks is that there's a $130 billion is nothing to sneeze at, right? Even if there are a lot of conflicts, that we shouldn't take our eyes off of that, right? This is a pretty big development, not just because it's AI, but for all the issues that we've discussed. And so I'd say we don't know what it is, what it'll look like. But it does sound like people are interested in ensuring that some mechanism continues to take place to monitor, oversee, maybe work with the Attorney General, maybe work with OpenAI if they're willing to ensure that that the organization truly is mission driven and that the assets truly serve the most vulnerable in our state, as you mentioned. Uh, the unlikely bedfellow. So, I think, one, I've been out of advocacy for a few years. I was working at a private company. And I had been reading the articles about this, but I couldn't do anything about it because I was at a private company. But once I launched Latino Prosperity, the first thing I did was I called somebody who I hadn't talked to in years. It was Judith Bell, who actually deserves a lot of credit here. She couldn't make it today, but I called Judith because of all people in philanthropy, I knew that she would remember the conversion battles. She would know how to organize. And between the San Francisco Foundation's network, my network, of course, we brought in folks that really know this stuff, like Catherine, the folks at the Economic Security Project, folks at PICO. So I would say, these are organizations that have a history of knowing each other, but haven't there wasn't an existing coalition that we were like ready to like just jump on, right? There was no existing infrastructure. And so looking back, what's beautiful about this story is how we were able to organize in a really collaborative way to really bring different diverse voices on a very important topic that was very, it was being covered by the Wall Street Journal from a very corporate restructuring point of view, and we changed that narrative.
Yeah, and I want to just call out you as well as Judith for your leadership. You put the coalition together and you held us all together. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we go next because I think it's vital that we have that group of folks now together to hold OpenAI accountable to actually meeting its charitable purpose. So, Pete, let me bring you into the conversation. As Liana mentioned, you work in partnership with 28 local United Ways across California to improve health, education, and financial stability for low-income children and families, and you have extensive experience working in the nonprofit sector. So why is this restructuring of OpenAI important to nonprofits? You're close to the community. What would the United Ways across the state lift up as priorities relative to AI in the communities you serve?
Thanks, Don. And I think the first thing I would mention is going back to the original founding of OpenAI, there seemed to be an emphasis on safety and security, right? And that's accounted for a little bit in the MOU that the company has made now with the AG. But that's what we need. We need ethical use of AI and ethical development and safe development of AI. Yuval Noah Harari wrote this book called Nexus, which I would really recommend to people. And the analogy he puts out is that this is nuclear technology, right? We're having private companies develop stuff that could really destroy much of what we hold dear about the life, human life, right? And OpenAI seems to be the sole company that has this hook where we have some insight into it with nonprofit law, but we need regulation, right? We need to make sure that all the companies that are developing OpenAI do it in a safe, or developing AI do it in a safe and secure way, right? And that's something I really worry about. Um, Next, for the nonprofit sector, right? United Way's work to help low-income working families move up, and so we work with the social safety net organizations and CBOs, grassroots organizations to serve people. Universities and hospitals have a lot of uh, resources to try and figure out how to use AI, how to use these new tools. And our concern is that a lot of nonprofits, and including United Ways, we don't have that flex capital really to experiment or develop in the ways that we'd like. So what I'd like to see from the OpenAI Foundation is more support for innovation at the edges where we're serving people, right? Low income households and helping them move up. So for example, benefits enrollment, right? We have every year we leave almost $5 billion a year on the table in federal dollars because people who should be getting CalFresh, SNAP, or Medicaid just aren't enrolled, right? And our systems aren't set up, and they could be perhaps using AI to make sure we get everyone on those systems, right? That's one thing. California has been spending a lot of effort the last several years developing whole person care, right? Where the whole community should be addressing all the social determinants of health factors that affect somebody. That's kind of a collective intelligence, right? And we could use AI in smart ways to make that more effective. And I'd like to see more attention to that kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. That's interesting. And the applications of AI to bring people into benefits, especially as benefits requirements are changing. Orson, let me bring you back. We talked about the MOU a few times. I know I've read it. It's got a lot in it. We'll probably share it, I'm sure, with folks after the webinar. But what are a few things in there that you think were sort of the things that the community got, and then things that OpenAI got for what they wanted? You mentioned a few of the sort of the goals of the coalition, but repeat sort of what were the wins. But then when you look at that, what do you say, gosh, OpenAI got what they wanted?
Yeah, again, clearly the fact that they put a valuation of $135 billion on the nonprofit with more to go, right? And they say that, right? If they go public or if the company grows, we have to remember they didn't start with that conversation, right? They start a year ago or a little over a year ago. They started with, we're just going to ditch the nonprofit. We're out. We're just going to go out, make money, and just call it a day. So I think we have to remember that's a huge change from their posture a year ago. Um, Clearly, it's not the independent entity we wanted, but we still have a mission-driven organization. And luckily, we're in California. We have a great attorney general that will hold folks accountable to nonprofit law. And even after him, I'm pretty confident that we're going to have a strong attorney general that's going to care about this. And so I believe the MOU gives us, without going into the particulars, gives the state ongoing leverage to continue to ask questions of OpenAI, right? They have to submit documentation. We're going to ask for those to be public, of course. There's a process here. And so as long as that MOU is there, as long as we have a strong state attorney general, and as long as we have a strong public looking at this, we have leverage to ask questions, and we should, right? We have, as Californians, as residents of the state, we can ask questions of any nonprofit, right? People can ask me to look at, my board meeting minutes and my financials, and so we can do the same. And the Attorney General has the power to do that with the MOU. Clearly, what they got is, they got to keep the assets, right? So it's in essence, it's kind of a corporate foundation. They get to direct where those charitable assets go instead of, losing them through independence, which is what we wanted. And it's just up to us to make sure that a corporate foundation can do good, right? Like I get funded by a lot of corporate foundations, bank foundations to do some really good work in the community. And so I think that we have to continue to push to ensure, and if we don't push, then we can, rest assured that, if nobody's looking, who knows what's going to happen with these assets.
I think you speak to the notion of being a watchdog. And given the scale of this, I'm so glad we're having this session today and starting to get the word out, but it's not on the radar screen yet of many of my colleagues nationally. And suddenly spawned the largest foundation in America and the second largest foundation in the world. Those $130 billion have to go to the public's benefit. They're charitable assets. So I'm glad that the MOU lays out some reporting mechanisms that we can hopefully use and leverage to ensure that the foundation is doing right by the public. Pete, let me hand it back to you. What are your big takeaways from this? So when you look at this sort of statewide sort of meta perspective, what do you think we should learn from this? Do you think there's a risk of reputational kind of for the sector, like a harm to our reputation? Suddenly we have this somewhat quasi-corporate nonprofit entity of this scale operating. What are the implications for the broader nonprofit sector from this, and what are your sort of broader observations?
It's a good question. I don't think the public's gonna really view the OpenAI Foundation as like a garden variety nonprofit or a foundation. So the reputational harm to the sector may not be great. I mean, people who really follow the law, right, around nonprofit law, um, you know, uh, we care a lot about it and about these subtleties, and some of them are not subtle. I mean, the notion that in with this settlement, uh, OpenAI Foundation has 26% of the equity in the organization. When there's an argument, it should have 100%, right? But the Delaware AG and the California AG must have felt this was the best deal that they could get at the time. So there's some, fairly important, nonprofit law aspects of this, but I think the public will probably not view what OpenAI Foundation does as something that speaks for the entire sector. I don't worry too much about reputational harm. I think, looking ahead, this technology is going to drive a lot of change. The disruption that you mentioned in your remarks, Don, about displaced workers and the impacts on the safety net. I'm hopeful that somehow this OpenAI Foundation will help lead a conversation around how we account for those, externalities, right? Not just safety and security, but what do we do about helping people who are affected by this technology? It's always been hard for low income workers to get 40 hours, right? 25 hours one week, 30 the next, maybe 40. Their income is very episodic, and it's very hard for them that way. I think that kind of precarity is going to happen to a lot more people. It's going to move up the chain, to lawyers, accountants, and many others, right? And so there's going to be a push, an even stronger push for guaranteed minimum income or guaranteed basic income, right? I'd like to see more attention put on that. When you think about all these companies that are based in California, right? And really just in the Bay Area, in many ways, they have, funding from Seattle or other places, but a lot of it's really happening here. Um, in Alaska, everyone gets a check because of the oil. But in California, we don't have an ownership stake in all this wealth that's being created, which is going to have global impact. So those are a couple of things I think we should think about, right? How do we as a society um, ensure that these tools are developed safely and that the economic disruption is minimized as much as we can? It should serve people, right? And unfortunately, with all the money you see going into it, you know, IBM back in the day when they started popularizing Watson, their a pitch to doctors and medical professionals was, this is not to replace you, this is to supplement you. It's to supplement humans, right? But there's such a stampede of cash and so much discussion that, it's reasonable to wonder whether people just really want to eliminate workers as much as they
Mhm.
possibly can. And there's a lot of that. We need to guard against it.
Yeah, I drive by a billboard on my way in and to work that says humanity had a good run of it, and then it
Yeah.
has the URL for an AI company.
Yeah.
Pretty disturbing. I also the notion of there being more coalition between middle income and higher income workers and low income workers, I think will be an interesting possible outgrowth of this
Mhm.
as we're beginning to see the sort of tightness of the labor market, entry level positions going away, folks get affected in the sort of middle income range. There may be an expansion of sort of coalition work of workers
Mhm.
to demand better kind of in the state. Orson, can I come back to you real quick just on a technicality?
Sure.
Pete mentioned a 26%. Could you describe some of the, or just the other roles the nonprofit board plays in terms of sort of governance of the for-profit? Because there is some voting rights, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and that's probably beyond my knowledge of how that
Maybe it's
works.
a maybe
Uh,
a Catherine
yeah,
question.
yeah, maybe Catherine can come in on that one. I think there's still a question in terms of overlapping board members and whether there are going to
Yeah.
be new board members here. So I think that hasn't fully been resolved right now. It looks overlapping. But in terms of, how the dynamics between them and the PBC and back and forth, um, I'm not a legal expert on that.
What was
Hey, Catherine, can you fill us
can you,
in?
can you say the question again?
So the nonprofit board has some rights beyond the 26% equity stake in terms of the governance of the public benefit corporation, if I'm not mistaken. Don't they have like hire and fire rights over the board of
Well,
the
yeah,
public
I mean,
benefit corporation?
they're still in control on paper.
Mhm.
And so I believe they can appoint the board members for the for-profit entity. I think they have which right now obviously those boards are completely overlapping.
Right.
Um, and they can hire and fire the CEO. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, they still, at least on paper, have whatever, the nominal nonprofit board responsibilities are of oversight of, their that for-profit entity.
I mean, the challenge, well, the problem is when you have the same board members in both places,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's no independence. And if it's a self-propagating board, when you bring on new board members, there's no, you're not compelled to bring on a bunch of independent board members who are going to think differently
Yeah.
than the
I
corporate
mean,
board
and
members.
fun fact, one of those board members happens to be Larry Summers. So
Yes,
Right.
that's
Boo.
just gonna
Right.
leave that fact there.
Yeah. There,
Orson, go
can
ahead.
I just say something about the overlap? Um,
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's a bad thing in itself. So, like the Safety and Security Committee is supposed to be led by an independent director who will only sit on the board of the nonprofit that supervises the for-profit, right? Um, but you want the Safety and Security Committee to have access to all the possible information that it could have. So maybe that person overlapping onto the for-profit board would not be the worst thing. It depends on how, those duties are carried out by the for-profit board, right?
I think
I
what
mean,
they've
they
decided
conflicted.
they decided that that needed to be the one independent role, but that board member will participate as an observer in all of the for-profit board meetings. And I think it's a little bit of a tell there that they know that there is a conflict of interest with the for-profit and the nonprofit board members, which is why they had to keep the safety member, a member of the nonprofit board only, and not on the for-profit board. I will say that the AG of Delaware gave an interview, which maybe we can dig up the link and drop in, where she seemed to indicate that this gaining one independent board member was like a huge win for the AGs and their negotiation with OpenAI, which struck me as really odd. I mean, I guess it's not a legal requirement these boards not be completely overlapping, but yeah, that feels like a giant red flag.
I think,
Yeah.
and I think
Go
you
ahead, Orson.
flagged that there's going to be a vacancy, and I think we should all push for Catherine to fill that vacancy.
Yeah, there will be one more independent board member coming
Yeah,
on.
they're
Maybe
adding
that
the
could be Catherine,
independent.
right? So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's not going to happen, but I would
Well,
do it if asked. I would do it.
You'd be great at
they,
it.
if the existing board appoints that one independent board member, you can see how that's not going to be a ton of independence that person's going to bring to the board. But we're down in the deets. Maybe when folks look at the MOU, they can see more of this. And these are the sort of things that we as a coalition need to be really on top of in terms of that watchdog role and whoever else joins us in terms of doing that. Orson, last question to you for folks who are on the call that are just getting aware of this or what's your sort of call to action? What are the next steps? Where can people learn more? What would you recommend to folks?
Yeah, and I'll drop it in the chat. But we have our microsite up, eyes on openai.org. There's a join button. If you want to stay engaged, get the latest news. We promise not to send you a daily update. But I think, really encourage you to go there, read some of the materials we have, but just sign up and stay abreast of what's coming next.
Thanks, Orson. Thanks, Pete. Do you have anything to add in closing?
No,
Okay, I
thanks.
know, Catherine, you're going to be next up, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, Liana, did you have any transition remarks you wanted to make, or should I just jump right in?
No, go ahead and whatever you wanted to say around how folks can continue to engage. Orson kind of already did, but if there's more you want to add, and then I believe Robert's gonna do a little bit of moderation. We have a ton of questions in the Q&A box, so I don't know how many we'll get to or how many you all have responses to.
Yeah, that's great. And Orson, actually, that was a perfect segue. And I think, the number one thing folks can do is to just stay engaged with the coalition. Um, the other thing I will say is I saw a couple of questions and maybe in the chat some comments about the legislature and what are other ways that
Mhm.
we can not just hold OpenAI accountable, but really look at this entire industry. That's what tech equity does for our day job is, we anchor a coalition of about 60 or California-based organizations that are weighing in on an ongoing basis on both legislation, but also rulemaking at the agency level and implementation and enforcement of existing laws around AI to ensure that as this technology develops, it is doing so in the public interest and we are developing it in a way that is advancing humanity rather than undermining it. So if you're interested in being engaged in that, we need all hands to the pump. I mean, we're getting wildly outspent by industry. Meta just announced they're going to spend $100 million in just alone in California statewide or state and local elections next year. So we're up against, no hyperbole, the most powerful industry in the history of capitalism, and it's going to take all of us to bring the voices of people who are going to be affected by this technology. And when we started this, it was really about, when we would make this case to other nonprofits, there was kind of a like, well, this isn't really my issue. I work on X, and you guys are the tech organization, so we trust you to go do it. But I think it's become clear over the last couple of years that this is, in fact, touching every issue that we care about, whether you work on immigration or economic justice or kids safety or whatever. We need your voices in this. So I just encourage you. I'll drop my email address in the chat if you're interested in learning more about how to engage on an ongoing basis in the law and rulemaking process. We'd love to have you.
Catherine, it's a joy to work with you and to support your work. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Robert.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Really engaging discussion there. We do have a number of questions in the Q&A box, and I'll begin with Peter. And Peter, I appreciate your engagement throughout the chat today. Peter asks, will OpenAI Foundation be a public charity or a private foundation? What kind of independent charitable entity do you want to see? And I'll open that up to the group.
Sure, I can start. So it is foundation and name only, meaning it's not going to be subject to a 5% minimum payout rule, right? So it is a nonprofit that they are calling the foundation. Um, what we would love to see is for that to be spun out, right? They're close, right? They've already acknowledged it can have its own board. They've acknowledged it has its own assets. Why not just go one step further, remove the conflict of interest, and spin it out into an independent entity that can remain tied to future valuation. So just because you spin it off now doesn't mean that you aren't allowed to get compensated in case OpenAI does go public in the
Mhm.
future. And so that's something that we think could have been done. We do think that there was legal precedent for that, and we're still going to fight for that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
The
I
next,
would say that,
please go
sorry, that
ahead.
I would agree with that. I think that Orson and all of our advocates should keep pushing for that. It should go the same route that the endowment and the other health conversion foundations did. I think the reason they're not treated as a private foundation right now is they already own the assets when they converted. If all the assets had come from one source, then legally that would make them a private foundation, right? And then they would have to follow all those rules, including the payout requirement. But they kind of, in essence, ratified giving, you know, chunks of the company to other people, right? And keeping a share. Um, I would agree that if we could, do a valuation and convert it and make it a separate thing, like the conversion foundations, that would probably be the best path.
Thanks, Pete. That makes a lot of sense. The next question comes from Barbara, and it's a little bit broad, but I think maybe we can touch on it briefly. And she asks, can you talk about the ethics and privacy of Anthropic's Claude and OpenAI?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of depends on what you mean by ethics and privacy. I mean, all of the chatbots and AI models are trained on our data. Anthropic just has negotiated a settlement with a group of authors for having illegally used several million books to train its model. I think they're in the process of negotiating another settlement. I think this raises an important question or point, which is that this is not just about OpenAI. And for me, I think one of the main reason I wanted to see an independent entity be in control of the assets rather than to have the existing nonprofit maintain control is that we're not going to address the problems that OpenAI is creating by just looking at one company because there are five others that are doing exactly the same thing with no oversight. And so this is really about corporate power and making sure that humans remain in control and that our elected representatives and democratic for now government is able to play the appropriate role in holding this industry in check, which is another reason why we need all of you to be engaged in the legislative conversation alongside this.
Appreciate that thought on democratic for now. Any other voices to add on that point? We can move right along to Sally's question. And this is kind of dovetails. How does OpenAI's public charity structure, or the ones that you'd like to see, compare with those others run by companies like Google or Microsoft? Or is there even a comparison there to be made?
I think Pete might have mentioned this, or Orson. They've effectively created a corporate foundation, and that is not consistent with public benefit, pure public benefit. So as a corporate foundation, you're serving two missions. One is the company's mission, and the other is using the assets for public good. These assets belong to the public, not to the corporation, so they need to be spun out into an independent entity and not conflated with the company's interests. So to me, that's the distinction here. And other corporations have corporate foundations. That's great. I mean, it's good, largely good for the public. They get funded annually on a typical basis based on, how the company is doing, and they serve, functions and advance the company's brand, do good in their communities. But that's wholly different from $130 billion of charitable assets that are sitting in this institution.
Thank you. Paul has a question, and this might be best directed towards Catherine. The structure that they've arrived at, OpenAI, seems to rely heavily on the nonprofit continuing to control the operating company. Will the nonprofit be able to divest any of its shares to make funds available for grant making or other charitable activities?
Well, that is a really good question. And I think it's one of the major questions that we still have outstanding is how much is the nonprofit in control of these assets? And this is where board independence really comes into play. I mean, if these were independent resources that were managed by a board that had no connection to OpenAI, I mean, you do what any foundation has done and sort of diversify as responsibly as you could. Now, whether OpenAI is going to allow the nonprofit to do that in the way that makes the most sense for protecting the assets long term is an open question. I mean, if you listen to the leadership of OpenAI talk about this, their sense is there is no other way to invest these resources that would give a bigger return than to stay in OpenAI because this is going to be, they're creating AGI and it's going to be a multi-trillion dollar company and you'd just be leaving money on the table if you tried to divest too soon. So, who knows if that, whether that's actually going to happen. It certainly doesn't seem like a responsible investing methodology, but we still have a lot of questions over how those assets are going to be the nonprofit assets are going to be protected. Are these preferred shares? If they go have another, equity round, are they going to sell off some of the equity of the nonprofit? And what protections does the nonprofit have over the value of its stake in the company? And then those are outstanding questions that we're hoping the AG will continue to look at.
In that same vein, we do have some questions about ongoing litigation. And so I'll bring Paul's question to the forefront. And Paul asks, how might the upcoming litigation in federal court, and we're essentially talking about Musk versus OpenAI here, impact the issues that we're discussing?
Maybe I'll just say, first of all, on the record, we are not funded by Elon Musk. People have asked that many times. Reporters have asked that, and just I'm pretty sure everyone pretty much knows that, but I think it's good to clarify. With that, that case continues to move forward. Um, and I think there was news today that they're urging a speedy trial. So we're not sure what could happen, but it is still something to look out for.
It is
Yeah.
interesting that it looks like how OpenAI is making their case against Elon is that he doesn't have standing because he gave the donation through a DAF and not directly, which I think reveals that they know he's actually right about the fundamental substance of the suit, which is that, he was told that what he was doing was giving a charitable contribution, and then that charitable contribution was used to spin up a for-profit entity that he now has no stake in. I mean, if I were him, I would be upset about that too. And I think that, the way that OpenAI is going about this lawsuit shows that they believe they have a lot of exposure here. So I think it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on that.
Great. Thank you for clearing that up. In that same vein, we have a question about disbursements, and it comes from Katie. And Katie asks, why isn't the OpenAI Foundation required to meet the 5% minimum payout requirement?
I see that as a really open question. It's not clear why. They negotiated an MOU. I think
Right.
that was within the purview of the attorney generals of Delaware and California, and others correct me if you disagree. But that
Right.
was a surprising sort of outcome to me. And maybe it's to Pete's point about the way it was funded.
Yeah.
But it looks like they were able to compel OpenAI to do a lot of things in that negotiation, and this wasn't one of them.
Right.
Is that right,
Yeah, I
Orson?
think the answer is
Yeah, I think Pete touched on that in his remarks in terms of why the mechanics of that.
yeah.
Whatever you want to repeat that, Pete.
Well, I think when Don mentioned, it's essentially a corporate foundation, right? And if the assets had been put into a new organization from one source, then that foundation would have to be treated as a private foundation, and the 5% rules apply. But this is basically, we started as a nonprofit, and what they did with the recapitalization was they allowed a lot of the equity of that nonprofit to go to other players, but the 26% stayed with the original founding group. And it's also not cash, right? I mean, it's valuation, but not cash. It's not liquid.
Mhm.
So And there's a couple reasons why they're not subject to a 5% payout requirement.
Yeah.
Pete, I think that's helpful in answering Paul's question here as well. And he says, why does OpenAI's 990 show so little in assets? The last one I saw in 2023 showed 20 million in assets. Is that the same answer there? It's a valuation, it's not liquid.
Probably. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how to account for the valuation. I mean, if we owned an asset that was worth that much, I would expect it to show up somewhere on my 990. So I don't know what happened between 2023 and now, right? It's an asset. It's just not cash.
Yeah, it's not.
So we
Yeah,
have a lot of illiquid assets in our portfolio. The value of those get reported on our 990,
Yep.
and we do liquidate existing equity shares in, the sort of portfolio we've got on a regular basis. That's how we make grants.
Mhm.
Is there a distinction here? This is actually a question. I mean, the private foundations are a different section of the tax code than a
Yep.
501c3. So they are a 501c3. I don't know if that makes a difference.
They're a subset.
They're a
Private foundations are
subset.
like a subset of 501c3s with unique
Yeah.
set of requirements.
Okay, so did they maybe they don't have to report their assets? They only have to report contributions? I don't know.
No, they should report their assets. So maybe the valuation kicked in later. I mean, it's possible, right?
yeah, we'll see on
I
the
mean,
next one.
Yeah,
right?
when is their last 990 from? It certainly was worth more than $20 million in
Right.
When you got the valuations for all the investors, every time an investor puts money in at whatever rate, that
Yeah.
sets the new valuation, which should show up on
Right.
your 990.
Yeah.
We can look into that. I have a bit of a longer question from Jennifer. So bear with me as I read it. The training of the AI model known as ChatGPT has been fundamentally done live by users, in that they receive billions of hours of software training for free under the umbrella of being a nonprofit and for the global good. With the shift to a for-profit that they are considering, the fact that human training would have cost billions of dollars and slowed development if it was not postured as a nonprofit. This goes back to, can the public sue for stolen intellectual property if this shift does not benefit the very public who trained the software on a daily basis? I know we don't have maybe a legal voice in the room, but any thoughts might be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably for a very specialized kind of lawyer to answer. But I mean, basically every tech platform makes its money by exploiting the behavior of people who operate on top of it. So, I mean, this is not just an OpenAI issue. There have been conversations around, I mean, as you use the tools, I'm sure you have signed or checked a box on some user agreement that says that you're okay with them using your data for those purposes. So from a legal perspective, I don't think you have any standing there. But there have been policy conversations around sort of digital dividends and that sort of thing, where sort of a fee would or a payment would come back to users based on the use of their data to train the tools or to feed the ad algorithms or whatever. Those are kind of small, a couple dollars each. So, I mean, there's some question. I think the idea of an AI dividend has come up, though, could we tax these companies to pay out a more substantial, fee to the public? Those are conversations I think we should be having. And yes, tech equity is a 501c3, and we have a related 501c4 tech equity action.
I think the intellectual property theft is a real issue, and it's going to be playing out in the courts. I mean, there's estimates that if every author actually joined a suit, there would soak up all the value, right? When you talk about digital dividends, and how we're going to fund universal basic income, we all really help to build this thing, right? It's our collective. This is something you all know. Harari really argues in Nexus, right? What they're embodying is all the knowledge that we've developed as a society over many, many years. And does that really only belong to the companies, right? Isn't there some benefit that should come to all of us from that?
Absolutely, Pete. And there's a question here, and I'll just underscore it. And it says, instead of advocating for job protection and security for working and middle class workers, why not advocate for universal income with the profits that come from jobs that are replaced by AI?
I
Well, I
think
mean,
there's an Imogen, I think there's an argument to be made that that's how you address the safety net issues. So when folks are unable to retrain and get better jobs, that the safety guaranteed basic income is one of the approaches. There's a lot of experiments going on. There's data, some good, some a little less, but I think it should be considered. The thing I believe is folks want to work. There's a dignity to work. There is, important part of being in the community and being part of society is contributing. And so personally, I think people want jobs. They want good jobs that pay a living wage. They want jobs that are predictable. They want jobs that give them career advancement. And they want jobs that provide enough resources so they can raise their kids to do better than they did.
Yeah.
And so I guess I don't want to blow right to let's give everyone a dividend and sort of not consider that folks have a desire and be part of to be part of the economy.
Yeah. I you know, I think a lot of the original impetus, maybe 10, 12 years ago for UBI actually came from the tech sector. So one example would be like Chris Hughes, who was a Facebook founder, wrote the book Fair Shot, right? And he was really trying to grapple with the notion that automation and AI may displace a lot of people, and we're responsible for that. What can we do? UBI was one solution that he proposed, right? And and to Don's point, people do want to work, right? But I think the point of UBI is we see it gives people the ability to go back to school, learn more things, or cover gaps in employment while they find the place that they want to show up for their community.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We've reached the end of our webinar today, but we did cover a wide swath of ground, and I'm glad that we were able to include um, all of you with us. So thank you so much, Pete, Don, Orson, and Catherine, for sharing your expertise with our community and joining us today. I know this issue will likely be ongoing. We'll be watching it and continue to keep you updated. I'd also like to thank all of the registrants and folks for joining us today. This was a very engaging conversation, and it's always wonderful to see such a robust turnout and participation in our chat. So once again, thank you so much to our panelists. Take care of each other. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at more California Policy Forum events.